I try to fire myself from jobs as soon as I can. And I think that's just something I'm consistently thinking of. I'm asking the team, a very small way, firing myself from a lot of the responsibilities and from a lot of the roles. But then I like to think about this technical co-founder and CEO as just flexibility.
Welcome back to Tech Teams Today, the show where engineering leaders share how they're building and scaling high-performing teams in the age of AI. I'm your host, Matt McClintock, and today I'm joined by two guests who have had a front row seat to how LLMs are reshaping engineering, product, and team design. James O'Brien is the COO and co-founder of Ducky.ai and brings a background in crypto, fintech, and early-stage startup. He's led operations and go-to-market strategy across multiple industries. Hongbo Tian is the CEO and co-founder of Ducky.ai. Before co-founding Ducky, he was an ML engineer at Scale AI and one of the foundational players in the AI data infrastructure space. Together, they've iterated their way through product pivots, built infra for LLM developers, and seen up close how AI is changing what it means to lead a technical team. So with that, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt.
So I'll start with James. What originally brought you into the AI space coming from crypto and fintech?
I just love riding waves. No, I'm kidding. No, it's honestly, it's kind of two-parted. As Hong knows, I really only care about two things when building companies, and one is I like to work with people that I like and trust, and the second is I like to work on interesting problems that make me want to get up every day and focus on them. But to give you an answer that's a little bit less philosophical and more tactical, quite frankly, the guy next to you on the call, I was pretty set on staying in crypto, and I was thinking about founding a couple things in the crypto space, as well as like interviewing around for interesting crypto roles. And then I was introduced to Hong through a mutual friend of ours. And it was one of those rare moments in life when, we meant to talk for 30 minutes. And even though the Zoom quality was terrible, we talked for like 2 hours. And I left that call thinking, I think I'll kick myself for the rest of my life if I don't take the opportunity to spend time with, work with this guy. So, and I was lucky enough that Hong obviously has a background in machine learning and AI, and he was already working on some interesting stuff that was absolutely fascinating. So he was a really patient teacher, and he got me up to speed to the best of his ability. And, the more we dug into it, just the more fast-paced and fascinating this entire industry is. So yeah, that's how I got into it. Not because I went searching for AI, but because I went searching for somebody that I wanted to work with for, 5 to 10 years, or maybe my entire life. And I'd be lucky if I got to do that.
Yeah, that's that's the best reason, right? It's like, they always say people don't quit companies, they quit leaders. I think the same thing goes for joining companies, is you don't really join a company necessarily, you join who you're going to work with. Sort of following up on that, you've said startups are about momentum and humility. Can you share a moment from Ducky's early days that testified to that belief?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. I know last time we chatted, the comment that I made about momentum still holds. I think company culture is hard to build. It's hard to intentionally build, and it's certainly hard to maintain as you grow. The culture, I think, obviously there's so many different facets of culture, but like the one that I want to focus on is the concept of possibility, the belief in possibility. I think as founders specifically, that's the one thing that you kind of have to buy into, or else why are you doing what you do, right? Like you're the kind of person who can go for it and make something happen. And I think that trickles down to the entire team, right? Like similar to what you said, Matt, like people are joining not necessarily because you're working on one specific thing, but they're joining because you're working with good people who you believe can make things possible and make things happen. And the joy sorrow troughs of startups are real, right? And it's hard to maintain momentum and maintain focus when things are really tough and the things that you're putting out into the world aren't hitting and aren't working. And it doesn't have to be crazy revenue, right? Like it doesn't even necessarily have to be customers won. Like there are many different versions of what progress and momentum look like. And keeping that sense of possibility alive is a lot easier when things are moving forward, not always in the way that you expected them to, but at least moving forward. And to touch really quickly on humility, I mean, I think I might have shared this with you the last time we chatted, but it's like, I don't know, I just kind of go at everything assuming that I'm at least in some way, shape, or form wrong. And I don't just mean that as like a, like I'm dumb, right? Like I'm wrong about everything. I just mean if you assume you're right, or you assume that it can't go a different way than what you expected, you're setting yourself up to be constantly disappointed. And you're also also setting yourself up to not see the other things outside your horse blinders that might be really good ideas or might be working, but you didn't go setting out to find them. So that to me is humility, which is just like assuming that there's a lot you don't know and being open to discovering, being open to being wrong, and being open. We like to say minimizing the cost of
Right.
failure. And you have to kind of bifurcate that sense of failure away from your sense of identity to just recognize that there's so much you don't know in this world. And very often the opportunities or the wins that you're looking for aren't going to come in the form or fashion that you thought they
And I
might.
think the past couple years have made everyone sort of revisit their ego, right? Of like, 3 years ago, I think you could have a certain knowledge stack and be pretty good in your career. And I think AI sort of booming and LLMs booming sort of made everybody think, okay, I'm going to have to learn a lot of new things. I'm going to have to adapt
Yeah.
quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a weekly
Right.
thing, right? Like the reality. We talk about this all the time. Like the reality that something that an entire technology stack or company is based on that's going to be invalidated. And I don't even mean in the way of like, oh shoot, Google built that. I mean like, oh, there's an entirely new technological know-how that's going to change the way that we do XYZ process, and all of a sudden like our tech is 2x invalidated and not as efficient, far more late, whatever. I think the most salient example of this for us in our journey thus far, and Hong, correct me if you disagree, was just like, and back to your question on like a specific example of humility, was just we were really convinced that like customer support was the thing to do. And not that it's not an incredibly valid use of AI. Like I think just being super realistic with ourselves, like we just weren't really good at playing and competing in that space. And I think if we hadn't come at it with hopefully some humility. I realize it's kind of unhumble to say it like that, but like some humility, we probably would have been down in the doldrums and like really down on ourselves. But instead, we looked at it more from the lens of like, okay, what didn't we see? What didn't we recognize the first time? And what have we learned? And that let us kind of take a more holistic approach to it and then decide to do something different that hopefully is a better use of our skills.
And I think another example is just, being a startup founder and then going to work at a startup that was somebody else's, right? Like the best idea is not always going to be your idea, it might be someone else's
Yeah.
idea, and having the humility to sort of don't just go work on what your next idea is, work on what the best possible idea is that you have access to, right?
Yeah, and it goes for people
Right.
too, right? Like, I think one of the things we say a lot is like, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're either in the wrong room or you're an
Yeah.
and it's like it's such a joy to work with people who are far better and smarter in their individual domains than we are, because that's how everybody gets better.
Yeah. I've always tried to live by that. So Hongbo, just for both of you guys, this is the first episode we've ever done with two guests. So feel free to jump in. If I ask one of you a question and one of you wants to chime in on it, feel free to jump in. But Hongbo, this one's for you. So curious what your experience was like at Scale AI and how it shaped sort of your thinking about what needed to be built in the AI infrastructure space.
Yeah. I think I'm sure like everyone knows a lot about scale just from public domain, from news. I think especially at the recording of this, there was a particular piece of news that came online this week. I think for me, scale really taught me a lot from that experience. It was a very interesting and unique environment where everyone I worked at Scale was extremely ambitious. At the same time, they were also extremely intelligent, which makes that a really, really potent combination. When it comes to think about like what Scale did really well, I think Scale really kind of did a great job at thinking outside the box about what AI infrastructure is. I know that thinking outside the box is kind of a trope. So what does that really mean? I think in the case of scale, it just really means critical thinking. Not necessarily try to be super creative in every single solution that you propose, but rather go back to the first principle and think very deeply about what exactly is needed in order to build AI. So even though Scale was a data labeling provider, it was still effectively a core AI infrastructure, because at the time it was impossible to train a lot of the supervised models without having labeled data. So I think my biggest takeaway from from that experience is how much ambition and how much optimism and can really drives you, but also just think critically, try not to follow necessarily what's been said, but rather think deeply and really go back to a drawing board about what you believe to be true and what those things then goes to indicate as part of your thought process.
So you mentioned sort of the big announcement this week, $15 billion, Meta putting into Scale AI and sort of data labeling. I'm just curious sort of what that investment means to you and sort of how do you think engineering leaders should be thinking about that?
I think my commentary on that is actually very, very limited. I think just from a personal perspective, I'm happy for Scale as an organization. I'm obviously quite happy for Alex because I think he's probably one of the hardest working individual I've ever had the pleasure of working with. The details of the deal is yet to be announced. I have no idea what's gonna happen. Fingers crossed there is some good opportunities for not only the current employees but the ex-employees of Scale as well. From an engineering leader perspective, I think Scale was certainly a very unique organization in terms of how it led engineering teams. I think going back to what I said earlier, a particular type of critical thinking was very valued at Scale. That effectively really allows Scale to play to its strength when it comes down to data. It's kind of the initial core business, which is data labeling, but later on becoming more of a dominant thought leader within the AI space. From an engineering leader perspective, I think my commentary there is just do what you're good at, play to your strength. I think every one of us have a slightly different skill set. I think in the what I'm really learning from this context is in the late in the most unhelpful way and trope way possible, be who you are, do the things you're good at, and allow those things to really shine.
I was just say I'll add one thing, which is like, and Hong, anybody correct me if I'm wrong, because you know so much more about the organization than I do. But I have obviously looked into them a lot. I've heard a lot from Hong, heard a lot of other, Scale current people and alums kind of talk about the business. And it's important to note that a lot of what they at least did in the past was services based. Right. And, there's kind of this like common belief in venture that like services won't get valued at venture multiples, and, et cetera, et cetera. And obviously, like, I don't mean to be too reductive, like Scale does so much more apart from just services, but it does fall in line with a theme that Hong and I see every day. I mean, like we just got off a call about this where folks are just asking very basic questions about AI, right? And I don't even mean like, what is a model? What is a GPT? They're asking like, what do I do strategically? And then once they even land on a strategy, like, how do I put this in place? I don't know how to put this in place. And there are so many off the shelf providers that you can go to get yourself, say 80, 90% of the way there. But a lot of these firms and companies like really do need services providers to do bespoke implementations, or at least they believe they need bespoke implementations. So I actually think like we're seeing a bit of a re-advent of like the services oriented businesses that are obviously incredibly valuable, as Scale has proven. And it's not just like a straight up SaaS model, right? Like there are services embroiled in these things because people do need help and they need guidance and they need expert implementation. And that's super interesting.
Yeah. And it is sort of against the grain for sure. Like, wait, like, aren't they a data labeling service being the key word, right? I guess this goes for both of you, but was there sort of like an impetus from Scale that led to the founding of Ducky.ai specifically, like a pattern or something you noticed or a gap that maybe you noticed technologically while you were there that led to sort of the seed for the idea for Ducky.ai?
Yeah, so I think to answer the question in a slightly different way, I think there was certainly personal motivation from my side at least. What I mean by that is like I think it's Scale is almost like the cookie cutter in terms of Silicon Valley AI companies. A CEO is MIT dropout. They went through YC. They quickly exploded within a very few years. They touched a lot of things that's quite sexy, including autonomous vehicles as well as large language models. A huge part of my personal motivation was just to, from that experience at Scale, to come to the conclusion that this is such an exciting journey where I want to have my own rather than just being a part of everyone else's journey. Most likely, you'll probably see a pattern there. I think a lot of X-Scale employees then go on to find their own company, which I think says a lot about the culture Alex cultivated at Scale. But kind of changing gear a little bit and talking about some of the technical aspects. When I was working at Scale, LLM was in a very different place back then. At the time, Transformer was an upcoming technology rather than a dominating a neural architecture. And one of the things that we had to do as machine learning engineers is to almost kind of fine tune, develop specific models for very specific applications. To give you some example, name entity recognition was a different task NER was a different task to summarization, which is a different task to classification, which is to say, is this or is not, which is also a different task to regression. So we almost had to, whenever we receive a large, at the time, I think the terminology was NLP. Whenever we receive a natural language processing problems, we would try to fit it within these micro buckets of technical understanding, which then meant that we had to like develop a model for a lot of these tasks. I think a huge amount of the technology has came online over the last 2 years or so. And it's actually ridiculous to think now that actually these are considered subtasks within what large language models can do. So from a technical perspective, a huge amount of our motivation for Ducky today is just to understand how much ability are we able to unlock from a large language model such that it such that it solves the individual problems without necessarily having an ML engineer doing fine tuning, doing very, very low level activities to either change the model parameters or change or even doing data transformations to actually train a model from scratch. So I think it's incredibly interesting to see how the technology has came online over the last years, but also just quite silly to see, or rather quite silly to think about the type of problems we had to solve 3 years ago compared to where we are now today.
Yeah, and I'm even thinking, like you say, the past couple years, but I remember playing around with NLP in like the early 2010s, and there was like the main open source framework was called Gate. I'm not sure if it still exists anymore. But you were just like manually uploading spreadsheets and coding everything yourself, and it took forever, and you'd have to call universities, usually like overseas universities that like had experience with it. I mean, and doing this as one person was, a nightmare. Whereas like now, a corporation can just go in and sort of not even need a machine learning expert or an NLP expert and get so much done. So yeah, I look back at sort of like the early days and I'm just like, wow, what a difference. Sticking with you, sort of, you've worked on AI systems at the data layer and now at the infrastructure layer. I'm curious sort of how you think about the job of a software engineer and how that's evolved in the sort of age of LLMs.
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, Ma. I think especially given everything that's happened over the last few months, and I'm trying to kind of temper my recency bias here. The job of a software engineer is on the brink of pretty significant change. A lot of this is ultimately facilitated by the fact that the work product of software engineers is readily available. Not only is it readily available, it's also extremely logical and extremely rational, and actually, in fact, very, very easy for a machine to interpret. I think software engineer as a role has fundamentally changed, and we're only starting to see the beginning of that change. Vibe coding, even though it's more of a meme, still has very, very real large implications. It almost bridged the gap between no code to low code, or at least some version of that. There's a huge explosion of engineering tools that has come online. I refuse to acknowledge that if I refuse to decide if these tools are fundamentally good or bad. I think at the end of the day, these are just tools. You can rely on them. You can abuse them in ways that's unhealthy. At the same time, use in moderation and use in a correct way, they probably do accelerate a huge amount of productivity. But more importantly, we're most likely only seeing the beginning of that change. And over the next few months, we're most likely to see really, really, or rather, we're likely to see a continuation of new features, new tools that comes online. We're likely only seeing the beginning of this workflow. As to what the end of this workflow would be like, I have absolutely no idea. And if I did, I'll be doing very different things.
Yeah, it's funny how, back in the day, you could plan your product roadmap like, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. And now it's like, let's talk about the next 3 months, right? Like, we can't go too far
Yeah,
beyond that because you only know what's going to happen.
man. I know. I'm sure we've all been in so many yearly planning meetings, and like the idea of that. I mean, the idea of a quarterly planning meeting, right? With fidelity, right? I'm not saying they're not worth doing because obviously it's important to align on vision and mission and things of that nature. But like, there's no way of knowing that that's going
Right.
to stick.
It's like, yeah, the best laid plans, right? So, James, from a product and operations lens, sort of, How do you stay aligned with what's sort of how the underlying stack of technology is evolving so quickly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty voracious reader of a lot of different things in life, both professional and non-professional. But on a professional stance, I read a lot of AI newsletters. I try to relegate myself not to like AI hype news, so to speak, but more like core infrastructure. And then said a little bit differently, like the kind of application or accessibility layers for that core infrastructure. I think it's really interesting to see the combination. It's all well and good for like an ArchiveX, so to speak, post to come out about like really interesting, intellectual work that's being done at universities. But as I'm sure we all know on this call, like, I'll throw numbers in the air here, but right, it's probably like a 99-to-1 progression of some of that academic work that actually makes its way into like productionalized software. But when it does, and you see somebody kind of like, putting a UI out there, putting an application layer tool out there that makes use of a groundbreaking technology, and then it gets substantial traction, like that's always something to really pay attention to. So I try to keep up in that. And I will say, like, I kind of built that muscle in crypto, which although AI is an exhausting and fast paced moving space, like crypto is even more exhausting and faster paced, though I think the foundational technological advancements were a lot harder to pin down in crypto because there was just so much hype. But where AI, you got to pay attention like 14 hours a day. Crypto, you essentially have to pay attention 24 hours a day, or else you're going to fall behind, or you're going to get liquidated, or whatever. So I'm grateful that I'm not up at like 4 in the morning, like just looking at Telegram anymore. But the same concept applies. And then really like, and I already said this a little bit on the earlier, but like Hong is just a really amazing distiller of information and a really patient teacher. And I get a lot of my news and technical understanding from the things that he shares with our team, and the things that the rest of our team shares in Slack. And that's really important, not just to understand those advancements, but also understand the kind of things that are actually resonating with members of our team, because I think it gives us a handle on how we move forward, what we build, to make sure that everybody is like feeling like their ideas are heard and like they're really excited about the direction that we're heading in.
I'm curious sort of what you've learned about balancing product intuition with customer signals in an AI native product like Ducky.
That is a tough one, and I'll be brutally honest with you. Like, I think one that we're still figuring out. I think the most reductive answer to your question is like you have to carve out time for things that customers ask for, as long as you feel as though you've done a gut check and you're like, okay, this is, even if it's not concretely like what was on our roadmap, it's like very in line with what we want to be doing and what we think is valuable to a broader use case. Obviously, there's a permutation there too, where if somebody wants to pay you a bunch of money to do something relatively bespoke, that's always worth considering, especially in an early stage capacity. And then like I wouldn't say that we don't work on intuition in any way, shape, or form, because we most certainly do, but we always try to pair validation with intuition. And we've been burned by this, right? Like we've learned this the hard way by saying, people are clamoring for this, or we really feel like we should do this, and then we go build it, and people say, yeah, that'd be awesome, I'll adopt it, I'll pay for it. Priorities change, roadmaps change, it doesn't end up panning out. So we try to be a lot more rigorous these days in terms of validating whether or not, and I don't mean a lengthy process, right? Hop on a couple calls, get a couple people you trust takes, get a couple design partnerships going, something along those lines. But trying to really, it's more like matching the clearest signal of customer intent that you possibly can with product roadmap, and ensuring that that intent actually transpires to usage, and you have everything lined up to help that come into reality, as opposed to just somebody flippantly saying on a call, yeah, cool, that'd be awesome. That's great, it's cool, like anecdotal energy, but it doesn't usually transpire to like concrete usage. So we've built a couple systems around that to kind of make sure that those things fall better in line than I think we did in our earlier stages of business.
Yeah, because it's so easy to, I think a lot of early stage startups sort of deal with this of, well, this customer wants this and this customer wants that, and let's just like spend all these engineering resources, and then, well, it's only that customer actually that wanted that, and so we just rolled this whole feature out for one customer, right? And you can't afford that.
Yeah, and it's like it's also very business model specific, right? Like we're a dev tool, right? We're like a product-led growth motion dev tool, meaning that the majority of people are paying us at maximum, like apart from like enterprise tier custom deals, like $300 a month plus usage, right? So if you're the kind of company that has 25,000, 50,000, 100,000, multiple six-figure deals, right? Like you can consider building things bespoke because you know you're getting paid for them. Whereas for us, we have to think far more broadly. And it's like, will this feature bring a lot more people into the free tier so they can test it up and then use it and upgrade and, bring us into their companies and all that good stuff. But it's like, we don't really have a business model that substantiates, okay, cool, like pay us 75 grand and we'll go build that for you, unlike a lot of like very enterprisey
Yeah.
companies.
So for Hongbo, I sort of still following on the topic of engineers today and sort of what you're looking at. Sort of, how do you think about hiring engineers today? Are you optimizing for infrastructure experience, LLM literacy, something else?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I think that type of question is especially quite important to us as well as a kind of like a core engineering organization. The kind of challenge that we face today is just that the not only is that the engineering role is being redefined, but also the technology itself is also evolving at a pace that we have never seen before. The question naturally then comes down to when you are looking to hire in a really volatile environment, what do you look for? Our answer to that is really adaptability. I think specifically for us, we're really interested in engineers that's able to learn things quickly, that's able to that's very open-minded in terms of what technology or tools that they're willing to take on, but also at the same time very critical in terms of what tools they should be discriminating and eliminating from their tool set. We see this role change a little bit from just a code creator to more of a code moderator. And I think most likely this role will continue to change. So we are trying to find this fine balance between you have to try everything at least once, but you also have to be able to try to keep up to date, but being able to say no to particular tools or particular skill sets once you find out where the strength and the weaknesses are.
Yeah, sometimes what you don't do is as important as what you do. Um, I'm curious,
Absolutely.
sort of,
I would say
yeah,
usually.
right. I'm curious, like, if you can think of any examples of like green flags or red flags in the interviewing process with engineers nowadays.
Yeah, I think we have a very opinionated take. The flags that we look out for. I think for us, motivation, and I think especially intrinsic motivation scores very high in our rubric. That typically manifests itself in different ways. Some of the candidates we look for have a chip on their shoulder. They have things that they need to prove, whether it is to other people or just even to themselves that they can achieve X. We find that that kind of core intrinsic motivation sometimes it appears as hunger, sometimes it appears as ambition, sometimes it appears as determination. Is the thing that is a amazing heuristics when it comes down to individual's ability to contribute, but also just how enjoyable they'll be to work with as a member of the team. So really all I'm saying is like I think for us the big green flag is abilities who believe they can go ahead and achieve more, they have more potentials to live up to, and individuals that believe they can change the environment rather than themselves being a product of their
Yeah,
environment.
so you're not,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'll interject really quickly just to say that like people people who are not only comfortable but excited about autonomy, right? Like I said before, right? Like bringing on people who are smarter in their domains than you are, and like people who again like not egotistical beings necessarily, but like people who are legitimately excited about that invitation to be like, look, I want you here because I want your voice and I want you to speak up and I want you to feel like you have the autonomy to make decisions. So that usually looks like in an interview process, people who are not afraid to speak their minds, people who come prepared with questions. Like that's a big one. We always leave time for questions. And if somebody goes, no,
I'm good.
I don't really
Yeah,
have any questions nor opinions, you're like, okay, thank you.
yeah, probably not
But
moving
that's usually
forward
a flag.
at that point. Yeah, I mean that I used to look for the same thing with hiring engineers. I think that's probably one of the biggest indicators, right? I think it's also a shift of you're not just looking at the engineer in a snapshot of who they are and where they are now in their career journey, but what they could possibly be, in a year, a couple years. And there should be a variance there, right? You're not just hiring them for the skills they have now. You're hiring them for the skills they could have, a year, a couple years down the line. So
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think to just add on that a little bit, and like slightly different version of the same thing. I think ultimately, as organizer of the team and as team coach, there are things that we can coach and there are things that we can't coach. We can, if an engineer doesn't have LM literacy, that's something we absolutely willing to provide and something we will be very good at providing. If an engineer doesn't have a particular skill set, we are more than happy to provide the environment and the resource needed to cultivate that skill set. One of the things that we really can't provide is attitude. And I think if engineers effectively, not just engineer, but just any people you work with, if they're only unwilling to be open-minded, unwilling to learn, set in very specific ways, that's something that we absolutely cannot
Yeah,
coach.
of I've been doing
Yeah,
this.
if folks don't have a bias towards action and an inquisitive nature, like those are tough things to cultivate.
Yeah, and that's a real issue, right? Of like, well, I've been doing this for 15 years or 20 years. This is how we do it. This is how it's done. It's like, yeah, maybe 5 years ago, like you could get away with that in some roles, but I don't think there's a role on an engineering team today where that's a valid point. So sticking with you, James, so kind of a similar question, sort of how do you look at hiring across product operations, marketing, and sort of how has LLM mania sort of affected that?
So I'll start with the LLM mania and then work backwards. Although when we started, maybe I should have asked this question, but I didn't. I've started asking about like people's internal fiddling with AI, and it doesn't necessarily again need to, like Hong said, right? Like it doesn't need to be like, oh, I have this superset process that I use and I love this and I built this, but it needs to be somebody who understands enough to know that there's an unlock to be had, even if they haven't figured out what that is yet, right? Like just that sense of that inquisitive nature of like, hey, yeah, sure, I'm not an engineer, but I'm going to be working at an AI company. And I know there are things that I can do to better myself or better my output, even if it is done in concert with XYZ tool, XYZ stack. So that's kind of like a proxy for me these days of like an inquisitive nature. And also like, again, my favorite ones are again, the bias towards action, which is like, I thought I could do this thing. So I went and I like fidgeted it into existence. I was like, awesome, right? Like that self drive of like actually having gone and done something, not just thought about it, is really important. Another one is like entrepreneurial bent, right? People who have either gone, and it doesn't have to be have started a company or even wants to go start a company. Like I think entrepreneurship is, it's a term that a lot of people reserve for like founders, but I don't think that's fair. I think it's just a sense of self-startedness. Is I saw this thing, I thought about this thing, I couldn't get it out of my head, and then I believed myself to be the kind of person who could bring it into existence, whether that was internal to a team, whether that was fiddling with hobbies. And again, it doesn't have to be in technology, right? Like
Yeah.
it could be, I wanted to start a bike shop, so I did. Or like I wanted to, like my neighbor, they were like, hey, go raise money for this camp you're going to this summer. And he was like, I'm going to design hats and sell them, and then I'm going to go door to door with a QR code so people can order them, right? Just like things like that. Just like I think I can do something. I was creative, and then I actually went and execute on it, regardless of how it went. Like that's really important to us. And then in terms of, I guess, like other operational and like marketing specific, I've been all over the map on this next one that I'll mention briefly, which is like I've gone from, it's kind of like the high functioning ninja curve kind of thing, where it's like, oh, I just want smart people. I don't care if they have domain expertise. And then on the other side, it's like, I really should have hired for a little bit of domain expertise. I wholeheartedly agree on the technical side of things with what Hong said, which is, like if people don't have deep expertise in RAG as an engineer, we can teach that. That's fine. But like as it comes to something, just as an example, growth, like we really went out of our way to find help on growth with somebody who understood the dev tools market. And the reason for that was because, again, we wanted somebody who would be better at it than we were and who could go make decisions on their own and bring a lot of value to the team because they had applicable real world experience from doing it themselves. So we're kind of back in that space of not necessarily in operations concretely, because I think operations are pretty ubiquitous, quite frankly. Like, we want people to work on process optimization with AI and all that good stuff, but like that's not rocket science. Like we can work on that together. But there are certain things like marketing to your specific customer, to your ICP, but also knowing that your ICP might be wrong and having the skill set to like change and iterate on that, but know enough to be able to follow your gut in that regard, where like we've definitely started optimizing for in the hiring process.
And sticking with you, James, sort of, having worked across different industries within tech, how has your leadership style changed in the context of AI?
Man, that's a super interesting question that I don't know if I've thought a ton about. I guess I'll harken back to crypto briefly, which is like crypto was a very manic industry. You're constantly under threat of hack. You're constantly under threat of being entirely invalidated or irrelevant on any given day based off of what has just come out versus what you did. And that's a whole nother type of existential threat that you like really can't wrap your head around. So you kind of have like the boogeyman sitting on your shoulder at like all times. And it creates a lot of neurosis. It really does. And the one thing that I think I learned the hard way was like, it's kind of your job as like a founder or a leader really at all to not fuel that fire, right? It's like, it's important to recognize that those things exist and entertain people's questions, desire for conversation. Like really, people get excited about stuff all the time when it just pops off. And you want to entertain that and you want to support that because you never want somebody to feel like you don't support them intellectually or like what matters to them matters to you. And at the same time, I think it becomes even more important than ever to have like guiding North Star and like mission and vision and a really good sense of self as a business, because that helps you kind of like separate wheat from chaff quickly, which is like, cool, this is interesting. Let's have a Slack thread about it. Everybody can nerd out. Awesome. But like, I think we can all agree we're not going to touch it. And then it brings, the process of reorienting your mission and your vision to be a lot more tactical, which is like, okay, if this is something we want to entertain, like let's have a conversation about that, but know that it's going to be a far weightier thing than just like swapping out a ticket and changing a prioritization on a roadmap. So all that to be said, like I think that really tracks with AI too, and like this is also very near and dear to our heart right now because like Honk spent the better part of the week like really thinking about what our direction is and kind of where we need to be positioned in the next 6, 12, 18 months, knowing that it might all get invalidated in a day, sure. But again, larger, more overarching themes and concepts like helping anybody make optimal use of LLMs without having to fine tune or train models. Right? Like that, at least in my humble opinion, fingers crossed, is a pretty safe bet that can ground a lot of the work that we do. So yeah, that might have been more than you bargained for, but that's kind of the way that I think about it.
No, that was perfect. Going back to Hongbo, so as a super technical CEO, how do you balance hands-on building with the company's, shaping the company's technical direction?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, and I'm sure as James has experienced, is also something I've experienced as attention over the last few months to a year or so. I think Program summarized this in one of his essay pretty well, which is that an individual contributor or a builder ultimately has a very different schedule compared to a manager. I think he referred to this as manager versus builder schedule, and I think this is ultimately one of the tension that is particularly challenging for technical founders, co-founders to overcome, because if you want to take 3 customer calls every day, then it's very difficult to also dive very deeply into a particular algorithm or a particular performance. A different way of looking at this is actually just rather than looking at attention is flexibility. What I mean by that is like you can have 3 customer meetings, but if push come to shove and we really need to fix a bug on production, you are able to change your roles quite quickly to either fix issues or to push code. One of the skill sets that I had to develop very quickly and try to master is just prioritization for a particular moment in time. Ask yourself, and maybe even ask a team, what is the most valuable thing we could do right now? Perhaps we literally just set out the technical direction. Yesterday, we all feel like we are the same page. There is no more to discuss. Let's roll our sleeve up and let's execute. But sometimes we might feel like we've been executing for a really long time, in which case your role as a technical founder will change drastically to go from an individual contributor to the role of a multiplier, where you have the right but also the responsibility to redirect the team. Another thing that I find particularly helpful is just to ask the team to fill the gap. This is something that has made a huge difference to my personal and professional quality of life over the last little bit. I've just been asking the team to step up to fill particular roles of which maybe used to be mine, but because I spent so much time stretching myself, filling particular roles, those members of the team never got the opportunity to flex their muscle in those roles, in those new responsibilities, or even to develop a brand new skill set. And I think as founders, your role is to be a multiplier. You can push code, but you'll be pushing code in a linear fashion where something that you cannot, or rather you exclusively should be optimizing for is to see whether if you can improve the performance of the team by 1.5 by 2x rather than just being another member of the team. And I think James always say this, and this is something I try to live by. I try to fire myself from jobs as soon as I can. And I think that's just something I'm consistently thinking of. I'm asking the team. I'm, a very small way firing myself from a lot of the responsibilities and from a lot of the roles. But then I like to think about this technical co-founder and CEO as just flexibility. Maybe one day we do need 5 engineers rather than two. Maybe that's a over exaggeration, but for 2 weeks, I can morph into engineer, write code, push the development speed in ways that is flexible and in some sense of the word at no extra cost. So I just really kind of really try to cherish that skill set rather than treating it as a tension or as a negativity.
Yeah, and the flexibility to know like when to button up versus when to roll up your sleeves, right? And
Yeah, precisely.
I feel like leadership now, everyone has to be a player coach. Like, even at a massive scale, like you're not gonna just be a coach all the time, right? Like everyone needs to get their hands dirty a little bit, especially if you want to understand the technologies that you're talking about and selling ultimately. So
Yeah, I think
yeah, no, go ahead.
my comment on that is I like to think that one day these type of activity will be something that's hard to come by and cherish, but also these particular the type of activities that gives you conviction as a leader. I think especially as an engineer, you never want to have someone leading you who doesn't have a great understanding of technology, who challenge your opinion in ways that's unfounded. And I think even though I am actively trying to fire myself from as many roles as possible, I still kind of really cherish these opportunities where I do get to roll my sleeve up because it's almost a way to gain street cred
Oh yeah, for sure.
and kind of like continuously maintain my conviction while I can.
Nothing motivates a team more than them seeing their fearless leader roll up their sleeves, get next to them in the trenches. I think that's like the one of the most important traits of a leader now more than ever, is, sort of that, like I said, sort of that coach leadership thing is becoming less and less of a critical role, especially at startups. I don't even think you can just be a coach anymore.
Mm.
So moving into sort of our a few questions for both of you, and either of you could pick who wants to go first. But so talking about production ready LLM usage, how do you think the definition of production ready LLM usage has changed? What is it today and sort of versus what it was 12 months ago?
Yeah, so I have a quick comment on that, but I will pass it to James later because I'm really curious to see what he thinks as well. I think from my perspective, what we're really seeing today from the market and from our customers are increasing value delivered to the end user, which shows most prominently as increasing complexity in how large language models are being used. Compared to 12 months ago, where a lot of the features that we're seeing are ultimately just reduced one-shot features such as summarization, such as a particular type of transformation. What we're seeing today is much, much longer agent trajectories with multiple tools being called along amongst the same trajectory, but ultimately unlocking a lot more value to the end user. Example of this is probably looking at one of the first coding unlock from LLMs, which is autocomplete. We had autocomplete since GPT-2 era, but more recently we're seeing this new generation, this new wave of coding agents where they would not only try to resolve the entire feature, but also in addition to that, make the commitment to GitHub automatically submit a PR and then even run testing. I think today what production ready really means is much more comprehensive feature set, looking to automate and effectively consume as much of the adjacent workflow as possible. Um,
Like the whole
but
CI/CD
love to understand
pipeline.
this from you.
Yeah, James, over to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it kind of in terms of, I think about most things in terms of some movie or book reference, quite frankly. It's kind of like the Peter Parker paradox, like maybe credit goes to Uncle Ben, which is like with great power comes great responsibility, which is that these models can do so much. And their ability to churn out something of decent value with very little know-how of how they are operated has also increased drastically in a very short amount of time. But people also know that they can do so much more, and they can do so much more with such greater specificity. And I think most teams struggle to unlock that specificity, but they know that it's possible, right? But they don't necessarily know how to cobble together the different pieces of infrastructure or the different portions of an LLM in order to actually unlock that and get it. So people are kind of sitting here with this thing of like, all right, well, I built this thing, it's doing something decent, and it lets me know in conjunction with all the news I read about people doing incredible stuff that it could do way more, and it could do far more specifically for my industry, for my business, for this workflow, for whatever. But I'm not entirely sure how to get there. So I think what we're seeing right now is that people are hitting that ceiling. Like, maybe it's a paper mache ceiling, right? Like they can get through it, but they need a little bit of help. But they're hitting that ceiling really, really quickly. And a lot of it too, is like the whole concept of like AI magic, I think has kind of done the industry a disservice as a whole, which is like, it's not magic, it's technology, and you need to know how to use it. But again, it's been fueled by the fact that like, oh, you can just toss something into ChatGPT and like, it'll do a pretty good job of most stuff. But there does come that point when like you actually need to know how to manipulate these models, manipulate tool calling, all of that good stuff. Like for example, Hong, we were on a conversation earlier with some other fellow founders and customers, and he was like, oh yeah, use a reasoning model, but like you're probably going to want to use a calculator function for the math portion of this because the reasoning model will probably get math wrong at a higher with higher frequency than if you did a separate call for a math specific agent. And I was like, oh my God, I never would have thought about that. But it's a great little tip and trick that will unlock the efficacy of this entire stack with something that's pretty simple and available off the shelf. But most people will just assume like, oh, I'll feed it all into a model, right? Like even the movement of like a standard model into a reasoning model is something that a lot of people probably would not think about. So anyway, I'll end my ramble here, but quick TLDR is that people are doing more than ever, but people are also, I think, hitting the upper bound of their own limitations for how to manipulate these models quicker than ever. And that's one of the reasons why, the AI tool and like accessibility layer for other applications is absolutely exploding, because it takes complicated things that people would have had to wrap their head around infrastructurally, and it gives them either a drag and drop or like a very guided interface to do that.
So that feeds perfectly into my next question, which is, again, for both of you. Where do you think the infra layer for LLMs is headed? Will devs need to understand retrieval, orchestration, fine tuning, or will it all eventually get abstracted away?
I'm definitely letting Hong take this one to start.
So I think we have seen a continuation of abstraction coming from outside of the market. One kind of like recent change that we have seen is the abstraction of interface, of how different tools are combined together, or rather not combined together, but a unified ways for large language models to interact with those tools. I think personally speaking, I don't necessarily think fine tuning is the best way to unlock value. And I think that's probably something where, and fine tuning is in fact something I've actively been advising our customer against because of the technical complexity it typically involves, not necessarily just understanding of how to fine tune models, but also the data operation process and the data acquisition operation, if you will, involved to even be prepared for a fine tuning. not to mention the uncertainty of the outcome. I think for us, we believe that retrieval orchestration will be very important for the future, for the next little bit. And then we're also expecting to see a continuous improvement in terms of the base generative and, if you will, the general purpose reasoning function, the general purpose reasoning capabilities we are seeing from the LM providers.
Yeah, quick take is that we're seeing it right now with MCP, right? Like it's easier than ever to do a tool call, and not that that's obviously abstracting like technical complexity entirely, because for the most part it is like still code ship required. Although obviously there's drag and drop platforms to make it a lot easier. But even in the past like 3 weeks, that's gotten a lot easier. I think the more interesting question, and I have a hunch, I obviously don't have an answer, is like the fundamental software question of like bundling versus unbundling, right? Which is like, will there be specific retrieval services that you can access through a tool call that will just drastically improve quality overarchingly? Obviously, our bet on that one is yes. If you have like a serious archivist as an agent who can not only find, but also curate the right information, that gives you an edge, specifically when you have like proprietary and internal data sets you're working off of. But back to the matter at hand, which is like, do we get to a point where all you do is go to one model? Right? Like you go to one model through a chat interface. It has really easy like OAuth integrations to anything you could ever desire, and you don't have to worry about it. But again, like then the question becomes, how did they build that? Right. So it's not necessarily something that the end user, even if it is a technical person, has to think about, but it is something that these companies who essentially like then have to make the choice, like, all right, are we going to build this infra, or is there somebody who's way better at this tool call than we are, and we're just going to build a simple integration? So my bet is that it gets abstracted away for the end user pretty quickly, but it becomes almost an increasingly relevant game of next level like ETL and integrations for technology providers.
Yeah, I like your ideal world scenario with one interface, multiple OAuths, API connections, and not having to go from model to model.
Well, the
And
real question, Matt, is what is the interface?
right, that was going to
Right?
be my
Like I
follow
think
up. Is it going to
everybody,
be chat? Right?
dude,
Yeah,
I don't know. I think we talked about
yeah,
this last time. Like, I don't know. Everybody loves to say that like chat is not the
right.
optimal interface, and I don't disagree. But I don't know what is. And I want to see at least like 6 people with a neural link, like before I'm down to give it a shot.
Yeah, that's their bus factor of 6. I think mine would be a lot higher.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. That's my that's when I jump.
yeah. So let's go into a rapid fire to wrap this episode up. So both open questions for both of you. Favorite AI tool in your stack right now?
I don't know if it's necessarily a AI tool per se, but it's definitely in my stack with respect to machine learning. And that's MCP. It's technically a interface, or rather a protocol because P is in the name, but it just brings so much capability and so much unification in terms of getting to call in the right place for the large language models. So specifically, even just on a personal level, I started to build my own MCP, which is surprisingly easy to integrate with cloud, and that's making a pretty big difference in terms of just my personal productivity. Um,
Yeah,
Love to know what your
Claude
answer
is
is,
definitely my
James.
yeah. I mean, Claude is definitely my model pick. You know that I love Claude projects. I think it's really easy for a Luddite such as myself to make like pretty optimal use of those. Three other answers very quickly. One, obviously Ducky. Duh. Two, Clay. I love Clay. Clay, their Claygen functionality, it's so damn good, and it's so well concepted. It's such a power user tool, but like it's so good. And then third is Quill. Quill is my favorite AI meeting tool, predominantly because they have like really amazing templates that you can use to change meetings into different summaries, action items, send them to a bunch of different tools. But they also just have the best smart search functionality of any tool that I've used to get like legitimately grounded answers when I chat back to a transcript, and that has helped save me so much time.
I'll have to check that one out. That's the only one I had not heard of previously.
Yeah, Quill's great. It's the XPTO of AngelList. So
Um,
you would expect it to be some pretty heavy tech. It's good.
Most underrated repo or open source project you've used recently?
Hmm. I'm not sure if this one's underrated, but definitely N8, which is November, followed
Mm.
by the number 8, followed by another November. I think the idea of having composable tools, easy and friendly user interface, is not new. In fact, we're seeing this executed many, many different times for different purpose. But I think what they do so well and what that project does really well is just the sheer number of integrations, but also the how easy they made the entire experience to be in terms of like. But I mean, I suppose lastly, but not most importantly, it's also an open source project. They probably benefit a lot from just having different contributors trying to make that tool work for themselves. And we definitely prefer tools like that compared to closed source tools, which has a slower development velocity. But also, you just never want to make a feature request and have to wait for more than a few months before you get that feature, because by then you already move on to something else.
I'll just go ditto. I do like N8N a lot, and their content on how to build things is so sharp. They do such a good job of use case examples.
All right, last one. Bold prediction for where LLMs or AI infra will be by the end of 2025. Not that far away.
I think, and there's probably already somebody doing this because that's the world we live in. But I think unified MCP is probably a very real future where you don't have to cobble together different servers. You don't have to make choices on tool calls. It's like an agentic MPC adjudicator, essentially. Like think about all the power of Zapier, but in natural language or like command line. Yeah, in fact, now that I'm saying it, like I bet somebody hit me up. I'm sure somebody's already done this.
Or will
But
or
like
will do it
call
now.
it just
All
like
right. Yeah.
yeah, I guarantee you somebody's already done it. But I think it's just a question of like how many integrations are built into it, how many tools are callable, that
Right.
kind of stuff.
Everyone wants to be
And then obviously the
Zapier
question
back in the
becomes
day.
like, oh,
Yeah.
exactly. And can we just do it and abstract away any sort of requirement for a UI and do it entirely via code? Or said even differently, like have these tools get composed on the fly agentically, which I think is also probably something that will happen or has already happened.
Mine will be a bold prediction, which is coding agents will reach, if not succeed, average human performance in software development. I think software as a field is perfectly suited for large language models and more frontier agents to tackle. Not only are there abundance of data sets available in the form of GitHub repositories, it also has an interactable environment where a large language model could go in, try different code base, execute, see what outcome that gives. And I think both of those effectively makes that particular problem very, very easy and very optimal for a large language model to tackle. More importantly, within this problem locally, it seems like we are probably closer to a fast takeoff rather than a slow takeoff scenario. And fast takeoff scenario, once we own that exponential growth, the time difference between subhuman to superhuman performance is most likely very, very low. It may be just slightly under human performance today. It will most likely will be superhuman performance within a very short period of time.
Bold take for sure. That's a wrap on this episode of Tech Teams today. Big thanks to Hongbo and James for joining us and for the honest, detailed look at how AI is changing not just the tools we use, but the way we lead, build, and hire. If you're leading an engineering team through the AI wave, we hope this sparks some useful insights. And don't forget to subscribe to Tech Teams today on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.